Have you ever wondered what it truly takes to create an unshakable bond of intimacy and respect in a relationship? In a world where connections are often fleeting and physical attraction is overemphasized, it's easy to lose sight of what truly matters. But somewhere, nestled in a serene village surrounded by rolling hills and whispering trees, lives a woman whose wisdom transcends time. Her name is Madame Laura, and her teachings have inspired generations to see intimacy not as a mere act, but as a profound dance of vulnerability, trust, and devotion. In the quiet village of Asmere, Madame Laura's humble home stands as a beacon of tranquility and wisdom. Built of weathered stone and timber, it carries an air of sacredness, as if the walls themselves are steeped in the stories and lessons of the past. The scent of burning cedar often wafts through the air, calming the spirits of those who seek her counsel. Villagers speak of her as more than a person; she is an institution, a living reminder of the beauty and strength found in the journey of life. One crisp autumn afternoon, a group of young villagers gathered outside her home, their hearts filled with curiosity. They had heard whispers of her teachings, lessons that delved into the sacred dimensions of love and connection, far beyond the surface level that most people settle for. They yearned to understand the secrets that could transform their relationships and, ultimately, their lives. As the golden light of the setting sun bathed the village in warmth, they stepped through her gate, their anticipation palpable. Madame Laura greeted them with a gentle smile, her bright eyes twinkling with the kind of knowledge that only decades of experience could bestow. Ushering them into her cozy abode, she created a space that felt timeless, as if the world outside had paused to let them absorb the depth of her wisdom. What followed was a conversation unlike any they had ever experienced, one that challenged their perceptions of intimacy and opened their hearts to a deeper understanding of love. As the young villagers settled into their seats, the air grew heavy with expectation. Little did they know, the questions they were about to ask would unlock truths that would forever alter their view of intimacy. What was it about the connection between two people that made it so sacred? Madame Laura leaned forward, her smile unwavering, ready to reveal the timeless wisdom that awaited them. The young villagers approached Madame Laura's home with a mix of trepidation and excitement. Their hearts were full of questions about love and intimacy, subjects often discussed in hushed tones, yet deeply intertwined with their desires for meaningful connections. They had heard countless tales about Madame Laura, how she carried the wisdom of generations, how her words had the power to soothe aching hearts and unravel life's mysteries. They had come seeking guidance, not knowing that what awaited them would profoundly reshape their understanding of love. The house itself seemed to mirror Madame Laura's essence. Simple, unassuming, yet undeniably enchanting. Built of weathered stone and timber, it stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by ancient trees whose rustling leaves sang songs of time gone by. Inside, the air carried the gentle aroma of cedarwood, a scent that seemed to calm their restless minds before they even crossed the threshold. Every corner of the room spoke of history and memory. The worn wooden table, marked with the imprints of shared meals and conversations, the neatly arranged shelves lined with books, and the flicker of a single candle, casting warm light across the space. When Madame Laura opened the door, the young visitors were greeted with a warmth that immediately put them at ease. Her snow-white hair framed her weathered but graceful face, and her eyes sparkled with life. She invited them in with a smile so welcoming it seemed to melt away any nervousness they carried. There was a serenity in her movements, a quiet strength in the way she carried herself that made her presence magnetic. Her voice, soft yet powerful, seemed to envelop them in a cocoon of safety as she gestured for them to take their seats. The group settled around the central table, its surface etched with the wear of countless conversations that had come before. A sense of calm began to settle over the room as Madame Laura took her place at the head of the table. She clasped her hands gently in front of her, her gaze sweeping across the group. Her presence commanded attention, but it was not an attention born of authority. Rather, it stemmed from the genuine care and wisdom that radiated from her. "Love," she began, Her voice, as soothing as a gentle breeze, is a subject that many think they understand, yet few truly do. Her words seem to hang in the air, each syllable drawing the young villagers deeper into her orbit. It is not just a feeling, not merely an emotion. Love is a commitment, a choice, and a reflection of who we are at our core. As she spoke, the group found themselves leaning forward, captivated by her words. Madame Laura did not rush her explanations, nor did she overwhelm them with complex ideas. Instead, she painted vivid pictures with her stories, weaving lessons about love and intimacy into tales from her own life and the lives of those who had come before her. She spoke of the importance of respect in relationships, emphasizing that without it, love could never truly thrive. Respect, she said, is not about submission. It is about seeing the other person in their entirety, acknowledging their strengths, their flaws, and their humanity, and honoring them for it. Madame Laura's ability to create an atmosphere of openness was remarkable. One by one, the young villagers began to share their own thoughts, questions, and uncertainties. They spoke of their fears of vulnerability, their struggles to communicate their feelings, and their doubts about whether they could ever build the kind of love they had dreamed of. Madame Laura listened intently, her expressions never betraying judgment, only understanding. As the evening wore on, the conversation deepened. The young people felt as though they were being drawn into a timeless dance of wisdom and understanding, guided by the gentle but firm hand of their teacher. The walls of the house seemed to dissolve, leaving only the warmth of connection and the resonance of Madame Laura's words. As the discussion reached a natural pause, a young man in the group cleared his throat. His eyes, filled with both curiosity and hesitation, met Madame Laura's. "May I ask something personal?" he ventured, his voice trembling slightly. She nodded with encouragement, her smile unwavering. "What is the deeper meaning behind acts of intimacy?" he asked. A hush fell over the room as the question hung in the air. Madame Laura leaned forward, her gaze soft but serious, ready to address the profound inquiry that would shape the next chapter of their conversation. "I'm so glad you asked," she began, her voice steady and filled with sincerity. "This is not an easy topic to discuss, but it is one of profound importance. You see, in today's world, acts of intimacy, including oral intimacy, are often misunderstood. They are seen as purely physical acts, driven by desire or pleasure. But in truth, they hold a much deeper significance, a significance rooted in trust, vulnerability, and a profound connection between two souls." Her words seemed to resonate, dissolving the tension that had filled the room moments before. She continued, "The act you speak of is not merely about gratification. It is, when approached with love and respect, a gesture of honor, a way of acknowledging the divine essence of your partner, and of expressing your own vulnerability. It is an act that says, I trust you enough to share this part of myself with you, and I cherish you enough to offer you this part of me." Madame Laura paused, allowing her words to settle. The young people leaned forward, captivated by the gravity of her explanation. She explained that in modern society, intimacy is often stripped of its emotional and spiritual depth and reduced to a transactional or superficial experience. Many people, she said, fail to see the sacredness of these acts. They treat them as commodities, something to be taken or given without thought or care. This perspective robs intimacy. She looked around the table, her gaze meeting each young person's eyes in turn. "True intimacy," she continued, "is not about what you take from the experience but about what you give. It is about putting the comfort, joy, and well-being of your partner above your own. It is about creating a space of safety and trust where both of you can be your most." She then shared a story from her own life, one passed down through her family for generations. It was a tale of her ancestors, who viewed intimacy as an extension of the soul's connection to another. Oral intimacy, she explained, was seen not as an obligation or a means to an end, but as a gesture of reverence and humility. In ancient times, she said, men who truly understood this act were celebrated in their communities. They were seen as protectors, not just of their partners but of the sacred bond that intimacy represents. Her words carried a gravity that was impossible to ignore. The group sat in silence, each of them reflecting on the wisdom she had shared. The young man who had asked the question nodded slowly, his expression one of dawning understanding. I never thought of it that way, he admitted, his voice soft. I always assumed. Madame Laura smiled gently. Many do, she replied. But when you approach intimacy with respect and a desire to honor your partner, it becomes something much more profound. It becomes a dance of giving and receiving, a way to say without words, I see you, I respect you, I cherish you. And that, she added, is where its true power lies. Her words lingered in the air, their depth leaving an indelible mark on the young listeners. Just as they were beginning to grasp the sacred nature of intimacy, Madame Laura leaned back in her chair, her eyes twinkling with anticipation. But to truly understand the roots of this wisdom, she said, we must journey back to the stories of our ancestors. It is there that we find the origins of these beliefs and the timeless truths they hold. The group leaned in, eager for the next chapter of her teachings. Madame Laura leaned forward, her gaze steady as she began to weave a tale from the past. Our ancestors, she said, understood the sacred nature of intimacy in ways that many have forgotten today. To them, it was more than an act. It was a reflection of respect, devotion, and the recognition of the divine within another. Her voice carried the weight of generations, and the group found themselves transported to a time when these beliefs formed the very foundation of relationships and communities. In those times, men were taught to revere the feminine energy, seeing it as the life-giving force that sustained not just families but entire villages. Women were considered the bearers of vitality, their essence tied to the cycles of nature and the continuity of life itself. Intimacy, particularly in its most vulnerable forms, was not merely a means of pleasure or procreation. It was an act of honoring the sacred energy within a partner, an acknowledgement of her unique power to create, nurture, and sustain. Madame Laura explained that men who embraced this understanding were celebrated, not for their dominance or physical prowess, but for their ability to humble themselves in the presence of such energy. These men, she said, were seen as protectors, not of their own egos, but of the sacred bond that intimacy creates. They were guardians of trust and respect, and in doing so, they elevated their communities as a whole. Her voice softened as she described these men, their reverence for intimacy reflected in every gesture. They were the ones who approached their relationships with humility, who understood that their role was not to take, but to give, to uplift, rather than to dominate. The greatest strength, she continued, lies not in control, but in the willingness to submit to the vulnerability that intimacy requires. It is in this surrender that true connection is forged. The group listened intently as Madame Laura shared a story passed down through her family. It was the tale of a young man who had sought the wisdom of the village elder after his marriage began to falter. He had approached the elder with a heavy heart, confessing that he did not understand why his wife had grown distant, despite his efforts to provide for her. The elder, a woman revered for her insight, had smiled gently and taken his hand. "Have you ever truly seen her?" she had asked. "Not as a wife or a mother, but as a soul with dreams, fears, and desires of her own?" The young man had been struck by the simplicity of the question. He realized that while he had cared for his wife, he had never truly honored her. The elder taught him to listen, not just to her words but to the emotions she carried beneath them. She guided him to approach their intimacy not as a duty, but as a sacred exchange, a way to show her that she was cherished for all that she was, not just for the roles she fulfilled. Madame Laura's story resonated deeply with her audience. She explained that this philosophy extended beyond physical intimacy. It was a way of being, a mindset that shaped how men and women interacted in all aspects of their lives. When a man approaches intimacy with respect and humility, she said, he elevates not just his partner but himself. He becomes a reflection of the trust and love that he seeks to nurture. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in before continuing. Unfortunately, much of this wisdom has been lost in today's world. Intimacy has been reduced to a transaction, a fleeting moment devoid of emotional or spiritual depth. This loss has left many feeling disconnected, not just from their partners but from themselves. Her voice grew stronger as she shared her conviction. But it does not have to be this way. By reclaiming the philosophy of our ancestors, we can restore the sacredness of intimacy and build relationships that are rooted in trust, respect, and genuine connection. One of the young women in the group raised her hand, her expression thoughtful. "How do we begin to change?" she asked. "How do we bring this philosophy into our modern lives?" Madame Laura smiled, her eyes twinkling with hope. "It starts," she said, "with intention. With the willingness to see intimacy not as a right, but as a privilege. It begins when we choose to honor our partners not for what they can give us, but for who they are. This choice, small as it may seem, has the power to transform not just relationships, but entire communities." The group sat in silence, their hearts and minds stirred by the depth of her words. They began to understand that intimacy was not something to be taken for granted, but a sacred act that required effort, mindfulness, and respect. As the firelight flickered in Madame Laura's home, illuminating the faces of her captivated audience, she leaned back in her chair and gazed at them with quiet determination. "But intimacy is not just about grand gestures or deep philosophy," she said. "It is about the small, everyday moments that build a foundation of love and respect. Let me tell you how those moments create the most enduring bonds." The group leaned in once more, eager to hear how this timeless wisdom could be applied to their daily lives. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. Madame Laura's voice grew softer, but her words carried a weight that held the room in silence. "True intimacy," she began, "is a dance, a delicate interplay between giving and receiving, where both partners move in harmony, guided by mutual respect." She paused, allowing the imagery to sink in. "It is not about taking as much as you can, nor is it about sacrificing endlessly. Instead, it is about finding balance, where both people feel seen, valued, and cared for." She turned her gaze toward the young men in the group, her expression one of gentle encouragement. "A man's role in this dance," she said, "is not to lead with force but to walk alongside his partner as an equal. He must be a companion, someone who protects not just her physical well-being, but her heart and soul as well. To do this, he must listen, not only to her words but to the emotions that live beneath them. He must learn to recognize her joys and her fears, her dreams and her doubts, and to honor them as he would his own." The group listened intently as Madame Laura spoke of trust, describing it as the cornerstone of every lasting relationship. "Trust," she said, "is not something that can be demanded or bought. It must be earned, brick by brick, through consistent actions that show your partner they can rely on you." She leaned forward, her eyes scanning the group. "Do you know what builds trust the fastest?" she asked, her tone inviting reflection. "It's not grand gestures or elaborate promises. It's the small, quiet moments of reliability. A steady hand in times of trouble, a listening ear when the world feels overwhelming, and a kind word that reminds your partner they are never alone." Her words seemed to resonate deeply, particularly with one young man who nodded thoughtfully. "But how do we know we're doing enough?" he asked hesitantly. Madame Laura smiled gently. "You don't need to do everything perfectly," she replied. "Perfection is not the goal. What matters is your intention and your willingness to grow. Love is not a performance, it is a process, a lifelong commitment to learning and evolving together." She continued, weaving examples from her own life into her teachings. "Sometimes we forget the power of small acts of kindness," she said. "A gentle touch on the shoulder, a heartfelt compliment, or even a moment of silence where you simply hold space for each other. These are not insignificant gestures. They are the glue that holds relationships together, the threads that weave intimacy into the fabric of daily life." Madame Laura's voice took on a playful tone as she addressed the young men again. "I know some of you think that grand romantic gestures are the key to a woman's heart," she said with a knowing smile. "But let me tell you a secret. It's often the smallest actions that mean the most. The way you listen when she speaks, the effort you make to remember the little things that matter to her, these are the things that will leave a lasting impression." She shifted her attention to the group as a whole, her gaze filled with warmth. "Fairness in love," she said, "is not about keeping score. It's about giving freely, not because you expect something in return, but because you genuinely care. And yet, when both partners adopt this mindset, love becomes an endless circle of giving and receiving, where neither feels depleted and both feel enriched. The young villagers were visibly moved by her words. They began to see love not as a transaction, but as a shared journey, one that required patience, effort, and a deep respect for one another. Madame Laura concluded with a piece of advice that hung in the air like a gentle melody. Remember, love is not just about how you feel. It's about how you make the other person feel. It's about creating a space where they can be their truest, most vulnerable self, knowing that they will be met with understanding and care. As the group absorbed the wisdom of her teachings, Madame Laura's expression softened. But a relationship, she said, is not just about what happens in moments of joy or passion. It is also about how we navigate the challenges, the doubts, and the fears that inevitably arise. To truly understand the strength of love, we must look at how it endures through hardship. Her words set the stage for the next chapter of her lesson, one that would delve into the resilience required to sustain love over a lifetime. As the young villagers left Madame Laura's home, their hearts were filled with newfound understanding, but they longed for more. They knew there was another elder in the village, Helio, who was known for his wisdom and his ability to distill complex truths into simple, actionable advice. Encouraged by Madame Laura's teachings, they decided to visit him, hoping to gain further insights into love and intimacy. The walk through the moonlit village was quiet, each step filled with anticipation. When they reached Helio's modest home, the warmth of a fire flickered through the window, and the scent of wood smoke greeted them as they knocked on the door. Helio welcomed them with a smile that radiated kindness. His weathered face bore the marks of a life lived fully, and his eyes held a calm wisdom that immediately put them at ease. Inviting them inside, he motioned for them to gather around the hearth. The room was cozy, with shelves filled with books and trinkets from his travels. As the fire crackled softly, Helio took his seat, leaning slightly forward as if to draw them closer with his presence. The young villagers wasted no time in sharing what they had learned from Madame Laura. Helio listened intently, nodding occasionally, his expression one of quiet encouragement. When they finished, he took a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking. "You've learned much about the philosophy of intimacy," he said, his voice low but steady. "Now let's talk about how to live it." Helio began by emphasizing that intimacy is fundamentally about emotional connection. It is not enough, he said, to share physical closeness or even words of affection. True intimacy requires that you open your heart and allow someone else to see the depths of who you are. It means being vulnerable and inviting your partner to do the same. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. This is where many falter. Vulnerability is not easy, but it is the foundation of any lasting bond. He then turned his attention to the importance of small, consistent actions. Love is not sustained by grand gestures or fleeting moments of passion, Helio continued. It is built in the quiet, unremarkable moments of everyday life. It's in the way you listen without interrupting, the effort you make to notice when your partner is struggling, the thoughtfulness of a simple gesture, a cup of tea brought to them when they're tired, a kind word when they feel uncertain. One of the young women in the group asked, "But how do we ensure these small actions make a difference? What if they go unnoticed?" Helio smiled gently. "Love is not about being noticed," he replied. "It's about noticing. When you act from a place of genuine care, your actions carry a power that transcends acknowledgement. Even if your partner doesn't immediately recognize the gesture, they will feel its impact over time. It's like planting seeds in a garden. You may not see the growth right away, but with patience and consistency, the blooms will come." He leaned back slightly, his eyes reflecting the firelight as he continued. "Think of love as a garden," he said. "You cannot plant it once and expect it to thrive without care. It needs water, sunlight, and attention. Neglect it and it will wither. Tend to it daily and it will flourish. The same is true of your relationships. You must nurture them with kindness, patience, and understanding." The group sat in reflective silence, each of them picturing the metaphorical garden Helio had described. They realized that love required effort, not in bursts but as a steady commitment to their partner's well-being. Helio's words had reframed their understanding, showing them that the power of love lies not in its grandiosity, but in its constancy, One of the young men finally spoke, his voice thoughtful. "So it's about showing up, day after day, even when it's hard." Helio nodded. "Exactly," he said. "Love is not about perfection, it's about presence, it's about saying, 'I am here for you,' not just in words, but in action." As the evening wore on, Helio shared more stories, each one illustrating the beauty of love rooted in humility and care. The villagers felt as though they were being handed a treasure map, one that would guide them toward deeper, more meaningful relationships. They left his home with a sense of clarity, their hearts lighter and their minds brimming with possibilities. As they walked back through the quiet streets, the young villagers felt a shift within themselves. The teachings of Madame Laura and Helio had begun to merge, forming a tapestry of wisdom that spoke to both the philosophy and the practice of love. They began to see that love was not just a feeling or an ideal, but a way of living, one that required effort, intention, and care. The changes they would bring to their own relationships and community were already taking root, ready to blossom in the days ahead. The teachings of Madame Laura and Helio rippled through the village of Asmir, like a stone cast into still water. What began as quiet conversations in a cozy cottage and a fire-lit home soon blossomed into visible changes in how the villagers approached their relationships. Families that once treated love as a given began to see it as an intentional act, something to be nurtured through small yet meaningful gestures. Husbands and wives were seen holding hands as they walked through the market, an act so simple yet so profound. These moments of connection, often unnoticed before, now carried a weight of renewed significance. Conversations around dinner tables grew deeper, as partners took the time to truly listen to one another's thoughts, fears, and dreams. Even the younger couples, inspired by the wisdom of the elders, began to prioritize communication and respect, weaving these principles into the fabric of their daily lives. The men of the village, in particular, underwent a profound transformation. Inspired by Helio's words, they began to shed the stoicism and detachment they had once believed to be signs of strength. Instead, they embraced vulnerability, learning to express their emotions openly and honestly. Acts of care that were once dismissed as trivial became vital tools for connection. A father brushing a strand of hair from his wife's face, a son offering a heartfelt thank you to his mother, these gestures became the language of love spoken fluently throughout the community. This newfound ability to express emotion extended beyond romantic relationships. Men began to appreciate and honor the women in their lives with a depth that had often gone unspoken. Whether it was a husband recognizing his wife's contributions to the household, or a brother supporting his sister's ambitions, these acts of recognition reshaped the dynamics within families. The women, in turn, felt a sense of value and respect that deepened their bonds with the men around them. The impact of these changes was not fleeting. They began to take root in the very culture of the village. Love was no longer viewed as an abstract ideal, but as a practical, living force that shaped every interaction. Children, observing their parents' renewed affection and mutual respect, began to internalize these lessons. They grew up in an environment where love was celebrated, not as something extraordinary, but as a natural and essential part of life. As these lessons spread, the community as a whole began to thrive. Disputes that once caused rifts between neighbors were resolved with greater empathy and understanding. Celebrations became more joyous, as the bonds between families grew stronger. Even the quiet moments, such as shared glances across a field or laughter carried on the breeze, carried the echo of a community bound by love and mutual respect. The village elders, who had watched these transformations with quiet pride, often spoke of the changes as a return to their roots. Madame Laura and Helio had merely reminded the villagers of what their ancestors had always known, that love, when nurtured with care, has the power to unite and sustain. They saw in the younger generations a hope for the future, a promise that these teachings would not only endure, but evolve. The most profound change, however, was in how the villagers viewed love itself. It was no longer confined to grand romantic gestures or fleeting moments of passion. Instead, it was found in the everyday acts that made life richer and more meaningful. A warm smile over breakfast, a quiet moment of companionship under the stars, where the unspoken understanding that someone cared deeply became the true measure of love's strength. As the community flourished under this newfound philosophy of love, the villagers began to reflect on the journey they had taken. It was a journey of learning, of embracing vulnerability, and of rediscovering the power of connection. Yet, as they celebrated these changes, they knew there was still more to uncover. Love, after all, is a journey without end, and the next step lies in understanding how to sustain this transformation for generations to come. As the sun set over the village of Asmere, the lessons imparted by Madame Laura and Helio continued to resonate in the hearts of those who had embraced them. Love, as they had learned, was not defined by dramatic gestures or fleeting passions, but by the quiet, persistent acts that built trust and connection over time. It was the gentle squeeze of a hand during a moment of doubt, the patient listening to a partner's worries, or the unspoken understanding shared through a warm glance. These were the moments where love truly thrived. Reflecting on their journey, the villagers came to realize that the teachings they had received were not revolutionary in their complexity, but in their simplicity. What made these lessons so transformative was the reminder that love, at its core, is about presence, effort, and respect. It is about making the people we care about feel seen, valued, and cherished through the smallest of gestures. These simple acts, repeated over time, create bonds strong enough to weather life's inevitable challenges. As we look back on the wisdom shared by Madame Laura and Helio, it is clear that their lessons extend far beyond the boundaries of Asmere. They are universal truths that apply to relationships of all kinds, from romantic partnerships to friendships and familial bonds. The idea that love is a living, breathing entity, one that requires nurturing and care, transcends culture and time. It is a reminder that every one of us holds the power to strengthen the connections in our lives, not through grand efforts, but through daily, intentional acts of kindness and understanding. To those reading this now, consider what these lessons might mean for your own life. How often do we take for granted the people closest to us, assuming they know how much we care? How often do we let opportunities for connection slip by, because we are too busy or too afraid to be vulnerable? Madame Laura and Helio's teachings urge us to pause, to reflect, and to choose love, not as an abstract feeling, but as an active commitment. Start small. Look for moments in your day where you can show someone they matter. It could be a heartfelt compliment, a thoughtful question, or simply making the time to listen without distractions. Remember, love is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is about showing up, day after day, with the intention to care and connect. We invite you to take these lessons to heart and apply them in your relationships. Think about the ways you can nurture the bonds that mean the most to you, whether with a partner, a friend, or a family member. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. What small gestures have made a difference in your life? How have you seen love transform the people and relationships around you? By sharing your stories, you contribute to a greater understanding of love's power and inspire others to embrace these teachings in their own lives. Together, we can create a ripple effect, spreading love and connection in a world that often feels disconnected and divided. Let this be the beginning of a conversation that reminds us all of what truly matters. As we conclude this journey, let us remember that love is not a destination, but a path we walk every day. It is a choice we make in the way we treat those around us, the way we speak, and the way we listen. By embracing the philosophy of love as a dance of giving and receiving, we can transform not just our relationships, but the communities we are part of. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might benefit from this topic. Have any thoughts or personal experiences to share? Drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join our community for more empowering content. Thank you for watching, and until next time, embrace the journey with confidence.